see. I know. Mo, get ready.
I'm ready. Yay! Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, so we're a little late, but we are still here and we're so excited about it. So welcome to the Fair Count Sisters for the Census. And you couldn't have better sisters on this call than the ones I'm about to introduce to you. So let's get right to it. First, we have up Dr. Janine Abrams McLean, who is the Fair Count Vice President. Then we have Dr. Janetta Cole, who is the President of the National Council of Negro Women, and of course, my forever Spelman president. And then we have Leader Stacey Abrams, who is the founder of Fair Count. So we're here today to talk about Sisters for the Census, why the census is so important. And let's just get right into it. And I'm gonna start off with Stacey. Stacey, tell us, how does the census impact everybody's day-to-day lives?
Stacey, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Hold tight, everybody, and we'll get Stacey on. We're just having a little audio problem.
Hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Yay!
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mo, for hosting. Thank you to Vice President Janine Abrams McLean for leading this conversation. And thank you, of course, Dr. Janetta B. Cole for always just being you. The census is so critical because in 2020, we will allocate for the next 10 years financial power and political power for Americans. The way this works is that the census every 10 years counts every person in our country, not every citizen, every person. And that means that anybody here on April 1st who resides in the US should be counted. $1.5 trillion will be allocated based on the census. And at the same time, we're going to decide how many people, or basically how many representatives in Congress each state will get. So that's called reapportionment. And the third thing is redistricting. That's when we draw the political lines that help you decide who represents you. The reason this is so critical is that it only happens every 10 years. There is no do-over. And if you aren't counted, you don't count. The example I use is this. Imagine that you get invited to a party and you know the party's going to have like a fancy dinner and you're going to get to go and see Beyonce or, you know, whomever your star of choice is. But if you don't RSVP and you still try to show up, you're going to be out in the garage eating a bologna sandwich. And you won't get to see the stars. You might get to, you know, see a bootleg copy of the video. But if you show up, if you get counted, then you get everything that you're entitled to. And that's what we want from the census.
Thank you so much for that, Stacey. I'm going to go right to Dr. Cole. Dr. Cole, tell us about, especially as the president of the National Council of Negro Women, why is it so important for sisters to get involved, for Black women to be at the forefront of this?
Well, I want to second the emotion of my Spelman sister, Stacey, by saying thank you, Mo, for hosting us. You know, enough is enough. We as Black women, as Black men and Black children have been undercounted, miscounted. Enough is enough. You know, I'm thinking back to the 1787 convention, when Black folk were defined as 3/5 of a human being. That's what enslavement meant. And so this undercounting, this not receiving what is our due must stop. The census is a way to help us stop this. Because as my Spelman sister Stacey said, it's about political power and it's about resources. Now, why Black women? Well, first of all, I'm turning to the good Dr. J, Vice President of Fair Count, to say thank you Thank you to you and Fair Count for inviting us in the National Council of Negro Women to partner with you. Because you know what? You can count on Black women.
Mm-hmm.
You can just count on us women folk. And in this partnership, we have pledged to put the power of our membership, that's close to 3 million Black women, to this task. Now, first of all, that means you can't lead where you won't go. So every member of NCNW must vote. I'm sorry, we'll get to that in a minute, maybe. Must take the census. But secondly, we need to be the ones going into our families. And you know how extended our Black families are. Going into our communities, making sure that not a single individual who should proudly claim to be an African American has not participated in the census. So you can count on women. Historically, we could. We are the demographic that consistently votes more than any other demographic. Then let us be the demographic that more than any other participates in the census and gets everybody else to do the same.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Cole, so much. And Dr. Janine, and I just love you so much. I call you Dr. Janine. Tell us all about Fair Count and how Fair Count got started and the work that Fair Count is doing, and especially what's different about this census in 2020.
So Fair Count was founded by Stacey Abrams, my second oldest sister. And she tells a story better than I do, but essentially she got me to quit my good government job to work with our CEO, Rebecca DeHart, to start Fair Count to make sure that everyone was fairly counted in the census in Georgia, as well as across the nation. So we do community organizing, deep dive community organizing. We work with faith leaders, community leaders. We also use technology to bridge the digital divide that we have in Georgia, as well as across the nation. We know that over 24 million households around the nation lack access to broadband internet. It's about 20% in Georgia. The other thing we know is that there are what the Census Bureau calls hard to count populations. I have a good friend, Nana Jomfi from Black Alliance for Just Immigration, who says hard to count should actually stand for hard to colonize. But we don't like that term hard to count because it implies that there's something inherently hard to count about people of color, about young children, about people in rural areas, the homeless. But really, in reality, it's the people aren't hard to count. The systems that are put in place to count them are faulty. And so what we try to do at Fair Count is to provide the resources, provide the infrastructure, provide the organizing to educate people about why the census is so important. In 2010, the last census that we had, 3.8 million Black people were missed in the census. 2.2 million young children were missed in the census. And we know that Black and brown children were twice as likely to be undercounted. And so as we were thinking about the ways that we could make sure that all historically undercounted populations were counted in the census, we first, we thought about our children, we thought about our men, and then of course, we thought about Black women, because Black women are powerful. Black women get, like Dr. Cole said, they get things done. We get things done. And we also know that we have to make sure that our families are counted. And as Dr. Cole said, we have the family structures are different around, and we have to make sure that we account for all of our children, our women. We have our Black Men Count initiative that's working to count every Black man. But if they leave some behind, Sisters for the Census will pick them up too. So we're going to get every single person counted.
That's wonderful, Dr. Janine. Thank you for that. And I'd want to go now back to Leader Abrams. And can you just talk to us a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting both the census work and also, you know, for that matter, all of the voting primaries?
We can't hear you, Stacy.
About now.
Yes.
You
Thank you.
gotcha.
For some reason,
Don't
somebody
even
doesn't.
open.
Exactly. So what we have to understand is that although we're in the midst of a pandemic and we don't know what the end will look like, we do know it will come to an end. The challenge we have in America is that our Constitution requires two things to happen no matter what's going on. One, we have to have an election in November. That is mandated by the Constitution. We have to pick the president, and we pick our congressional leaders and all of our other leaders at the same time. And two, we have to have a census. The Constitution doesn't allow for a do-over. You don't get a rain delay and you don't get a pandemic delay. And so part of the responsibility that we have is to ensure that both of these things happen regardless of what's going on around us. We know that for COVID-19 and the responses we're seeing at the federal level, there are absolutely challenges. But part of being a member of this nation is that we have to be ready to step in when things fall apart. And right now, that means that every single person, especially Black women, have the opportunity to solve for the problems that seem to be baffling our federal leadership. Number one, we know that a lot of folks already received their first census envelope. They've gotten the invitation to respond. But in the midst of this crisis, that envelope is probably on the bottom of the stack of mail that you haven't gone through yet. But since most people are now sheltering in place, go through your mail, go through your stack, look at the junk mail you meant to throw away or shred, and find that census envelope. You shouldn't miss it because it actually, in fact, Tyler's going to hand me mine. I'll be able to show you what it looks like. This is it. You've got it. And it says on it that you are required to respond by law. Let's believe them. So go to the bottom of your mail, find this envelope, open it up, and inside it will give you your code so you can go online. A lot of folks don't have stamps in their homes right now because it's not Christmas time and you're out of the poinsettias that are the forever stamp. But you can go online and fill it out right now. But the next thing is that you've got to remind your friends and family to do the same. Not everyone's watching this. And as Janetta Cole said, as Dr. J said, I'm going to start calling her that other than just my little sister. We've got to tell folks about it. But the most important thing is that when you count, don't just count yourself. Count everyone in your house. The way the census works is that it counts everyone who resides with you as of April 1st. So if you know that your cousin has been there for longer than the 2 weeks he said 3 years ago, then he's probably going to be counted and you need to count him in your house. But you also need to know that your next door neighbor who is from an immigrant family and has a couple of kids who were born in America and maybe one child who was brought here when she was 2 or 3, they all count. And we have to remember that when we talk about immigration, it's not simply Latino or Asian Pacific Islander, it's also African and Caribbean. We have to count everyone. And the census will not hold you accountable. It is not an immigration question. It is not an immigration test, and it's not going to go to ICE. If you have a light bill or a phone bill, they can find you already. So fill out the census so they can give you your money and your political power. The last thing I'll say is this. In the wake of COVID-19, we know that there are rural communities that will not be getting the support they need immediately. Part of what was going to happen was that the census was going to hand deliver this information, the actual filled packets, they were going to deliver them to rural communities. But because of COVID-19, that rural delivery has been put on hold. They're hoping to restart it in April, but we know that given the curve of COVID-19, it may not happen. But as I said, there's no do-over. So what we want to do is stay in touch with you and make sure that if you've got friends and family that live in communities that don't have access to the internet, that haven't gotten their packets yet, they can call and fill out the census. They can request the information. So one of the reasons Fair Count exists is because I anticipated something might happen to communities. I didn't expect a pandemic, but I knew that our communities tend to be left behind when resources are at stake. And Fair Count is designed to help make sure we make those connections and get it done anyway. When it comes to voting, we're also hard at work through a group I started called Fair Fight, working with a number of organizations around the country, because part of the reason the census is so important, it decides who our leaders are starting in 2021. If you like the leadership you're getting, great. If you think we might need a change, fill out the census and remember to go and vote. They work together because the people we choose for the next 4 years, the next 2 years, the next decade, they get chosen based on our response to the census. And if we do not respond, people will assume we like what's going on. I don't know about you, but I'm in the mood for new leadership.
Stacey, one quick question for parents that have college students at home. What happens with the college students? Do they count the college students now that they're home, or do the college students get counted while they, because they were away at school? Do they wait to get their notification?
So technically, the colleges should be counting the students, but we know because of all of the urgency of shutting down campuses, sending kids home, some families brought their kids home before the college said so. There is a deduplication process that the Census Bureau can use to make sure we don't count the same people twice. Let's let them do that. Count your kids where they are on April 1st. If they're at home with you, count them, report them. If your college also reports them, then what can happen is that the Census Bureau can basically decouple and remove them if they're counted twice. But the problem with an undercount is you can go down, but you can't go up. And so I'd rather our college kids get counted at home and let the Census Bureau figure out if they should have also been counted at their college, but don't assume that someone's going to do the work for us. The problem is if they don't get counted because each person was waiting for the other side to do it, then that child goes uncounted and those resources go unallocated. Janine, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll let you say that.
Okay.
Perfect. Dr. Cole, I wanted to get back to the work that the National Council of Negro Women are doing, and how important are these partnerships in 2020 for all the work that is going on?
Well, Mo, I want to say that while we are deeply engaged in this, I'm going to call it struggle, because we kind of know about struggles to make sure that every Black person is counted. The National Council of Negro Women isn't the only civil rights or women's rights organization. The NAACP, the Urban League, every single Black organization that you can think of understands that we got two things we better do. We better get counted in the census and we better vote. But the NCNW does have this special relationship with Fair Count because we see it as an organization that is focused exclusively on this task. Our other civil rights and women's rights organizations, including the National Council of Negro Women, we have a number of missions that we are devoted to fulfilling. So again, just imagine mobilizing our membership, which includes, by the way, 32 affiliates. You name an African-American sorority, and they are an affiliate of NCNW. You think about all the church groups. I'll say that more properly. The church groups, women's church groups, all affiliated. Organizations like the Top Ladies of Distinction, which means that think about this as each one touching many, many more. And so if you are an NCNW member, that means you're probably also touching an incredible number of other Black folk, of other folk, and indeed of organizations.
Thank you so much. Janine, Dr. J, I want to bring you in to talk about the real life implications of people not participating and the work that Fair Count, the research and the data and the work that Fair Count has done to explain to people how crucial this is. And now, as we hear about over 3 million unemployment rate, how this affects our communities if we don't participate in the aftermath of COVID.
Mm-hmm. So the Urban Institute did a study last year where they estimated the potential undercounts for communities, or these historically hard to count communities, or undercounted communities. And for the Black community, they estimated that 1.7 million Black people could be missed in the 2020 census. When we look at how much money each person brings to their community in federal dollars. So we know in Georgia, it ranges between $2,300 and $3,700 that each person that is counted will bring to the state, and conversely, that will be lost if by each person that is not counted, and that's every year for the next 10 years. So when you look at that across the board, if that undercount of Black people happens across the nation, we're looking at over $3.3 billion in federal funds that will not go to our communities every year for the next 10 years. And so these are resources that affect education, healthcare, infrastructure, disaster recovery, all of these things. One of the stories that I like to tell is that, you know, when we talk about counting our children and why our children are so important to be counted, census numbers determine Head Start spots. They determine whether your child's class will be overcrowded. So if you have 5,000 students in your community, or 5,000 children in your community, and you only count 1,000 of them, you're only getting 1,000 the federal funding for 1,000 of those children, even though you see the other 4,000 running around. And so the story I like to tell is that my oldest son is 8. And so in the next census in 2030, he will be 18 and about to graduate from college, or graduate from high school, unless he's a prodigy, but he'll be getting ready to graduate from high school. And that means if there's an undercount in my community, that Cameron could be in overcrowded classes that will affect his ability to learn. I'm a former high school teacher. I know what it's like to be in an overcrowded class and how it affects both the children's ability to learn. It also determines whether or not my community is able to fix our roads. If we have raggedy roads and I am spending hundreds or thousands of dollars every year replacing my tires, then that is money that could have gone to his college fund. And so it really affects us from top to bottom. And then when you think about how it impacts healthcare, you think about states like Georgia, where we have, and Stacey knows the exact number of how many hospitals have been closed. There was a report that came out of Albany, Georgia today that one of the main hospitals there has already run out of beds in the midst of this pandemic. And so, and also thinking about kids, there are 63 counties in Georgia that do not have access to pediatricians. And so what we need to do is, by being counted, by counting the children, by counting every man, woman, and child, we are able to say, hey, this is what our communities deserve. Here are the numbers to back it up. So give us what we deserve. Give us our fair share.
That's wonderful. And
Stacey was piggybacking.
Yes.
Can't hear you.
Is it like me now?
Yeah.
For some reason, it just makes me do extra work. The one thing I would add is this. For a lot of folks, they don't quite understand how the allocation works. I used to work for the city of Atlanta. I worked for the Office of Management and Budget in DC. I worked for the EPA as an intern. And so I've seen this happen over and over again. What happens is that in order to guarantee that no one gets more than their fair share, the federal government puts a formula together. And that formula says, this is the population that's supposed to be served. Here's the amount of money we think it costs to serve this population. And here's the amount of money we allocate. That formula, and it's a little bit more complicated, but that formula is what every single governmental entity getting resources uses. And so if you are not counted, what happens is that you're not in you're not in the formula. So as Janine said, this isn't simply about do they see you? It's literally what money comes to your community. In Southwest Georgia, we've lost 2 hospitals recently, 6 hospitals over the last few years. And the loss of those hospitals mean when people get sick in Randolph County or in Dougherty County or in Early County, there is no bed to put them in. The bed was paid for based on a formula for a public health system. And because of the population counts and the undercount of rural populations that also tend to be rural Black populations, they have even less than they should. And because of that, in COVID-19 times, when there is a pandemic, there simply aren't the beds there because for the last 10 years, those communities did not get the resources they need. The corollary to that is Medicaid expansion could have paid for those beds because the formula would have said, this is how those monies get spent. And that's why we have to think about it not only as the money, but as the politicians, because the political leaders that are selected based on the lines that were drawn 10 years ago, the political leaders who live in those communities voted against giving money to those communities. The state legislators who represent those places said, we're not going to give you the resources you need. And so the census is not just about the money, it's also about the political power. And the folks who live in those communities who cannot get those beds, right now they only have a choice of voting based on the way the lines were drawn. But if we draw the lines better this time because people get seen, then they have a better choice of people to pick from so that in 2021 and beyond, they might have someone who's actually thinking about saving their lives.
So, Stacey, what you're essentially saying is that the powers that be want to continue to keep the power in the neighborhoods and in the places and in the politicians that they want in order to continue basically the status quo.
Right. Right now, politicians are picking their voters. We need the census to be accurate so we can pick our own politicians. And if you'd like what you got, because this is what they did in 2010, I started Fair Count because I became Democratic leader in Georgia in 2010. And in 2011, I saw what they did with that new power. I saw how they drew the lines to separate communities of color, to pack Black people in so they don't really get to make choices, ignore other communities of color, and aggregate their power so they could have as much power as possible. That's what politicians do, and I've been one of them. But the reality is people are in charge. And for so long, we've abdicated our power because they've tried to take it from us. And sometimes it works because we get convinced that we're by ourselves. The census works because if we work together, if the Sisters for the Census see that it's not one vote that makes you powerful, it's your ability to bring people together, to count everyone. We can overwhelm the system with our numbers and we can take our power back. That's why I'm so excited about this work.
That's awesome. Dr. Cole, talk to the women, the men, anyone in a household right now that just doesn't see this opportunity as really that important and, normally wouldn't vote and feels the same way about the census. What can we say to them today to change that?
Mm-hmm. I don't usually make threats. I prefer the positive approach. But I think I'm going to make a threat. And I'm going to say, Mo, that if there is any African American person who does not participate in this census, I'm going to call down the spirits of our ancestors to haunt you. That is my threat. Because we can't see this as a 2020 issue. This goes back to 1619, when Black people were literally enslaved. This is connected to every struggle we have been engaged in for our rights as human beings. And so if you can't take a matter of minutes to fill it out, to go online, to answer the phone, then you know what? You are saying that every one of the individuals that the good Lord made with this wonderful hue, it doesn't matter what they have done, who they are, and most importantly, you are saying that the future of Black children is meaningless.
Thank you. That is so powerful, Dr. Cole. Thank you so much. I'd like to just, as we wrap up, I'd like to just ask each of you to tell the website and the resources that are available at your organizations. And Dr. Janine, we'll start with you with Fair Count.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Cole. You can learn more about our work at Fair Count at faircount.org. We have resources for elected officials, faith leaders, Black men, our Black Men Count initiative, anything that you need there. You can also learn more and sign up to be a part of Sisters for the Census at sistersforthecensus.org. So go online today, share this information, share the website, share everything with everyone in your networks to make sure that we get every person counted. Let's get it.
That's wonderful. And so, Dr. Cole, tell us about the, how people can get in touch with the National Council of Negro Women.
Well, first of all, I'd be shocked if you don't know somebody in your community who is already a member of NCNW. Because given the work that was done by our iconic leader, Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, for over 40 years to build this organization, given her story, not our history, her story, as founded by the legendary Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, you gonna tell me there is somebody in your family, your auntie, your grandma, your college student who isn't a member of NCNW? So check them out. Get the information directly. But just in case you're not woke and you're not in connection with someone in NCNW, then come online, ncnw.org. We will tell you specifically how you can be in the single most important struggle of this moment. Get counted.
Thank you so much. And so, Leader Stacey Abrams, how can people get access to the work that you're doing?
Well, I want to do one quick thing before I give you that information. People are legitimately afraid. And I think all of us understand that. They're afraid that if they respond to the census, something's going to happen. So I want to dispel a couple of myths. Number one, if you have, as I said, if you have a light bill or a phone bill, they already know how to find you. So the census isn't giving them information about who you are, where you are. What you're doing is confirming, and that confirmation is what the census is all about. That census information also confirms how many people of color, so which race, because different issues affect different parts of our community differently. And we know for the Black community in particular, issues of education, issues of incarceration, issues of healthcare are prevalent. And so they want to know who you are and where you live to confirm where the money should go. But they cannot use that information against you. So if you have an outstanding warrant, if you did some stuff nobody should know about, they can't use this data to find you. Can't be done. Since 1790, it has not happened. That's a really long time. But the way the data is put together, it's aggregated so they can't go in and pick you out of a lineup or put you in trouble. So number one, it cannot be used against you. Number two, for 72 years, that information is confidential. I'm 46. I have yet to see myself in the census because I have to wait 72 years before I can see the first census where I show up. That's an important protection. And if you did anything that's going to haunt you for 72 years, you might want to start thinking about what you do. Number 3, there is no citizenship question. The Trump administration tried to scare us out of completing the census, not by simply terrifying those who are undocumented, but by trying to scare their families by saying, if you fill this out, they'll be able to find your family. Not going to happen. And in fact, if you fill out the census, if you do it online or by phone or send it in by mail, when eventually they start sending enumerators to knock on your door, if you've already responded, they're not going to knock on your door. And if you're afraid of who might be knocking, don't answer. Fill out the census ahead of time and you can take care of yourself. But the last thing is this. The census is simply a story of America. It is a story of who we are today. And today we are the most diverse nation that we have ever been. Our communities are growing and thriving. The young people in our communities outnumber what we expected, and we need to protect them today for tomorrow. As Dr. Cole said, and as Dr. Janine said, they start telling the story of tomorrow today. And if we aren't in that story, then we're written out of the narrative and we're written out of our future. Time is going to come whether we like it or not, but we need to have the resources to meet the challenges head on. Fair Count is critical to that work, and I was proud to found it in 2019, and I'm even prouder of its leadership, President Rebecca DeHart and Vice President Janine Abrams-McClain. But I also launched Fair Fight. You can go to fairfightaction.org or fairfight2020.org. That's our local work and our national work, our political work and our non-political work. So if you just go to Fair Fight, actually type in Fair Fight, you can find out all about us. And the third organization I created is called the Southern Economic Advancement Project, or SEAP. So if you go to theseap.org, you can find out all about the work we're doing across the 12 regions and the 12 states in the South. Because we know that in the Deep South and in the larger South, problems when they visit us for longer and they take a lot longer to solve. But we're working to solve those problems. So if you go to theseap.org, we've got lots of resources on how we can help you. So go to Fair Fight to find out how to fight for your right to vote. Go to the SEAP to find out how to find the policies to make your life better, and go to faircount.org to make sure you get counted in the census. Because if we can vote and if we are seen, we can change America and we can change the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Woohoo, yes. Yeah, woohoo, yes. Thank you so much, Stacey, for that. And this has just been an amazing town hall, an amazing conversation today. And I just want to thank all of our participants, starting with Dr. Janine Abrams-McClain, my two Spelman sisters, Dr. Janetta B. Cole, and of course, leader Stacey Abrams. And so you have all the information you need. I count, you count, everybody in your household counts. So please be counted. So on behalf of Sisters for the Census, we want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.